Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy, bliss at the breast. In psychoanalysis, the breast is not just a biological organ, and in the mind of the infant, it creates a world of its own. This is a very deep, subtle, and not so easy to comprehend an area. So let us discuss it with our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Mr. Vaidya, why is it so important to discuss this entity called the breast in the context of psychoanalysis?
The human child is completely dependent on outside agencies for its survival. The breast is one entity which is outside of the child, on which the child depends for its life and death. Instinctively, therefore, we are programmed to look out for and relate to the breast. Instinctively, also we realize it's a question of life and death, whether the breast is present or the breast is absent. Therefore, the criticality of the breast to the infant is almost instinctively ordained. The breast also is the organ of relationship, relating, pleasure and touch that the infant experiences in the real world. And because we are relationship object relating organisms, the criticality of the first relationship is very high. The breast, therefore, is not only a source of survival, but also a source of pleasure, also a source of quality of life, also a source of security. Therefore, it appears as an omnipotent, all good object that provides all that we need, almost like a kalpavriksha or a kamdhenu. During this stage, it is also important to note that we are in an infra-rational stage. We are in a pre-rational stage. Rational thinking does not appear by itself suddenly. Slowly we learn to think rationally. And while we are learning to think rationally, we are in a pre-rational stage and we think many things to be true which rationally are not true. And because this is so, another important feature of the same stage is we don't have the capability to attenuate or moderate or calibrate the generation of affect. Affect generation is very high. It is almost as though the whole system, which is ready to get activated, is in search of an object in the outside world whose presence can activate the whole system towards it. And this is what happens with the appearance of the breast, that all the cognitive and affective faculties suddenly get activated, and the subject of that activation becomes the breast. The whole system is almost like waiting for a data point outside in the real world to start processing what it naturally is destined to process. The attenuating capability, the calibrating capability not being there, affect generated is very high. So another important area of our early relationship to the breast is this. One, it is a question of life and death. So the intensity of relationship and dependence is very high. Two, the loss is viewed as equivalent of torture and death, and therefore the loss significance psychologically is very high. Three, we are in a pre-rational stage, and therefore we cannot calibrate or moderate generation of affect. Therefore, affect generation is very high. Four, template formation happens because of experiences which are suboptimally interpreted. And these templates which are created, they then affect us for the rest of the life. And therefore, the power of the templates is very high. So the fourth point is templates get created, long-term templates. In our early relationship to the breast, and early experiences with the breast. So template creation happens during that stage. These templates have very high power. And sixth, these templates are deeply repressed. So even in adult stage, when we go to therapy and we intellectually know about it, we cannot easily erase those templates. And this is a very important element, that these templates are very difficult to reach and change in adult life. Not that they cannot be done. This is why we do therapy for, but it is difficult to do it. So these 7 points are very important with relation to our early experiences with the breast. And therefore, the breast is not only a biological organ, but a very important organ from a psychological standpoint, not only as an organ, but as a metaphorical entity, which we relate to. And in those relationships, based upon our satisfaction or frustration, many other things get created, which then influence the way we think and live for much of our lives. And those things which are deeply hidden and buried inside of us are not easy to recognize, reach, or change. So this is the significance of the breast, uh, experientially and in effect, with relation to the way our mind gets created very early in our lives.
How does it work for other mammals?
We don't exactly know how they think because they cannot communicate to us in our language and we cannot communicate to them in theirs. But inferential and behavioral studies point out that in most mammals, the absence of breast or the loss of the breast in early life leads to many difficult things for the child. So it seems to be more of a mammalian trait. And we see that in famous experiments of uh, the two groups of monkeys, where one group was provided with a bottle giving milk and another group was provided with something like the breast but not giving milk. And those who were able to relate to something which was like the breast but not giving milk came out with better health than those who got milk, where the biological need was met but the psychological needs were not met. So the significance of psychological needs that the breast fulfills has been established in many experiments done with mammals. Now, I have seen some of the animals where you can make out from the physical and the psychological behavioral patterns whether in early life they had an experience of acute loss or not. But whether it is universal or not, I am not sure. And I'm sure as we go along, by and large, chances are we will see the repetition of what we see in humans in other animals also in relation to the effect that object loss or the loss of the breast or inadequate presence of the breast has on the child. I think this is a very mammalian phenomena, may be graded and calibrated differently in the species, but essentially a very generic phenomena to that whole genus.
How do Freud and Klein engage with this concept of breast in their theories?
Freud's idea of the child was the idea of a microman. So he looked at the child as though the child was like us, but small in size and lesser in capability in the mental area. And so for him, uh, the breast was important in the Oedipal phase as an object of pleasure, in the oral phase as an object of pleasure, but the breast was related to always as a part of the whole mother. Freud never conceptualized the idea of part objects. So the relationship always was to the full mother. And therefore, the oral phase relationship was essentially based upon pleasure and based upon the element of trust, whether the world is a safe place or not, trustworthy place or not. So the issues that Freud was looking at was not part object issues, but relationship to the full mother through the breast. And he was looking as child's relationship to the breast in the oral phase based upon pleasure and related to the template of trust and safety, and in the Oedipal phase based upon the idea of pleasure, and in the anal phase at times based upon sadism. With Klein, the relationship to the breast was very different because she realized that the child is not a micro man. The way we think as adults is slowly learned over a period of time. And this learning is a fumbling experience. Just as when we learn a bicycle, we fumble, we fall down and we learn. Similarly, thinking also, we fumble, we fall down and we learn. So the rational thinking, which is a part of our adult life, is not a given. It has to be acquired as a skill. And in the process of acquisition, we fumble in our thinking. We think many not correct things. We think many fantastical things to be true. And that fumbling, this learning process, often creates templates which later affect us in adult life. So for Klein, this part object relationship was very important. That the child associates itself to the part object of the breast before he realizes the breast is a part of a larger mother. So the part object relationship precedes the full object relationship. And for Klein, internalization of a good, reliable, stable breast was the cornerstone of psychological health and biological health. And for her, closing of the split of the all good and all bad breast and giving up of the ecstasy of the all good breast and saving oneself from the terror of the all bad breast, putting them both together to create a realistic version of the breast was the cornerstone of a depressive position and a very necessary uh, goal of health. So much so that in her therapy also, reaching the depressive position is a very important element of Kleinian therapy. This also has other aspects as to why certain people cannot close the split. And that has to do with experiences with the breast, be it in reality or in fantasy. And here we have two elements. One, too much experiences with the bad breast, not allowing the split to close. Because there's too little of good experiences. And they have to be saved from getting completely destroyed in that synthesis. So that synthesis becomes a destructive synthesis if the good is less than the bad. And therefore, whatever good is there has to be saved and the synthesis has to be avoided. Integration has to be avoided. It's a very destructive integration. So that would be one reason. And the second is there can be a addiction to the ecstasy of the good breast. And again, the split cannot close. And both of them are very important from a Kleinian point of view in terms of adult pathology or even childhood pathology, not closing of the split, the terror of the bad breast, and the ecstasy of the good breast. And we see manifestation of them in a variety of pathological conditions. So for Klein, the ecstasy of the good breast was one of the elements that I call bliss at the breast. The experience of ecstasy and the splendor of the all good omnipotent breast is what I call is, I put that experience under the broad category of bliss at the breast, which has many other experiences also, but one of them is this. And this is where The relationship to the breast is very important from a psychological standpoint in the Kleinian worldview. And I think many people have slowly started realizing that it's a very important element in human nature. If we dig deep enough, we find much of what she said actually is true.
How do you explain this term that you have coined, the bliss at the breast?
Uh, the simple explanation is when the child is at the breast and he is getting all that he wants, or he has just stopped feeding and now everything that he wants is going as he wants in the body and around him, he experiences the bliss. And those two feelings of bliss, being at the breast and having just finished being at the breast, both of them are very blissful experiences. We experience bliss, we experience a sense of fulfillment, a sense of completeness without any need for any object inside or outside. And that is the state which I call is bliss at the breast. But near to these states or variations of this state can be seen in a variety of situations. So you can also use this bliss at the breast as a category phrase. And under that category, have 4 or 5 different states of experience which you can put under this category of bliss at the breast. First one, what Freud calls the oceanic experience. Before, in Freud's view, object relation starts, where one feels there is only one complete whole and nothing else, that oceanic experience of primary narcissism. The bliss which is experienced in that state constitutes one experience which I say comes under this broad category of bliss at the breast, the bliss of oceanic oneness. The second experience is actually being at the breast and feeling the sense of bliss. The third experience is having just being at the breast and feeling that blissful orgasmic experience after a feed. The fourth experience is the spiritual experience of no thought. It also gives you a feeling of bliss. The fifth experience is of spiritual oneness with existence. Sixth experience is the ecstasy of the good breast, which can be experienced even in the absence of the physical breast psychologically. And the seventh experience is the experience of feeling very fresh. You have just woken up after a very deep sleep and you feel bliss in that refreshing experience, which you can also have by meditation. Deep meditation also will lead to the same experience of intense freshness or refreshment. And then we have the state of reverie, where in the evening, slowly the thoughts are passing by and you experience certain forms of bliss or certain forms of delight. Or in the background, there may be a soft form of bliss and a very slow, dreamy kind of situation is going on in the mind, maybe artistically productive or otherwise. All these experiences are the experiences which are very near or are flavors of what I call the broad category bliss at the breast. And all these experiences are very pleasant experiences. They are actually goal states. We all want to be in those states as far as possible, and therefore they are very important to all of us. In fact, in spirituality, many of the states that I have described are actually goal states. These are the goals to be reached. And therefore, these 4 category of experiences of what I call bliss at the breast are very valuable experiences often they are the goal states of a long-term self-development process in psychology or in spirituality.
You have coined two more terms, desert and the splendor and addiction of ecstasy.
Right.
Can you go into this and explain them a little?
We can start with our addiction to omnipotence. If we look at the way we relate to celebrities, we relate to the splendor that we project onto them, the ecstasy that we feel when we go and we meet them. And this can be celebrities of any type. It may be movie celebrities, sports celebrities, political celebrities, or even spiritual celebrities. And there what we see is this experience happens even in everyday life. That person X almost worships person Y, who happens to be a celebrity in some form. And there we see both these phenomena. There is being dazzled by the splendor, and the splendor is because of projections from inside. Because we have experienced the all good breast, and there was an ecstatic experience to which we are addicted, and we have somehow put a control on that addiction. And when we visualize it, it appears as a glorious splendor. So the visualization is of splendor and the feeling is of ecstasy. And we are addicted to the ecstasy and we are dazzled by the splendor. And this is what happens in real life also when you go to meet a celebrity or you go to meet somebody very difficult to meet. There are projections from inside of the omnipotent object onto that person. And then we are dazzled by the splendor of that person and we feel ecstatic in the presence of or admiration done by that person. And this is a very common phenomena in falling in love also. That in some stage of falling in love, we are dazzled by the splendor of the other. And we are addicted to the ecstasy that we feel in being with the other. So both of them have to do with projection of omnipotence and our early life experience of all good breast onto that person. But these experiences are so pleasant that we just don't want to let go and we want to repeat it and stretch it as far as possible. In fact, they are so addictive that we want to repeat them no matter what the cost. So even at high cost, we keep repeating those experiences or we keep searching for those experiences. And we see most rational of people doing irrational things under the effect of this search for the ecstasy and the dazzle of the splendor. So both of them flow from our early life experience with the breast, particularly of those states when we were ecstatic and we experienced that bliss at the breast. And now the search for repetition of those experiences continues and we project onto people and we experience both of them, the dazzle of the splendor and the addiction of ecstasy. And we can see in pathology also, in dazzle of the splendor, we see quite commonly in avoidant personalities, where the omnipotence is put on the other and the de-idealization of the self. And in addiction, often we see that person is addicted because he is in search of the same ecstasy he once felt. So in pathology also we see manifestations of it. In ordinary life also we see manifestations.
Like we have discussed, a child's state vis-a-vis the breast. Now, how does it work in adults? I mean, is it the we see the same response to the breast as we have discussed in the case of the child?
Let us say for the adult, the breast is not so much a object of survival as much it is an object of pleasure. And here it is a very gendered phenomena, partly speaking, and partly it is not, but partly it's a very gendered phenomenon. So for the adult, the breast is more of an object of pleasure and a taboo object rather than an object of survival. But that is one part. The second part is the early life experiences of ecstatic pleasure with the good object always remain, the good breast always remain. And therefore, the craze for this particular part of the body is far more than most other parts of the body. So that in an indirect way just does uh, affect the mind of the adult. The third is it also depends upon whether we are talking of a male adult or a female adult, a heterosexual adult or a bisexual or a homosexual adult. Because these factors also come in the way they approach the understanding of the breast in their minds, both consciously and unconsciously. And lastly, the search for an all good breast and the terror of the all bad breast that always remains. Just look at how adults are terrified of authority figures. Maybe the policeman, maybe the teacher, maybe the doctor, maybe the politician. The authority figures, the terror of the authority figure has an element of projection of the bad breast. And look at how the good breast gets projected on very archetypal figures, be it the nurse, a female teacher, or an elderly woman. So these projections, even in adult life, both normal and pathological, keep happening all the time. And both get projected, the good breast and the bad breast, and also the search of omnipotence. See how people are crazy just to meet a celebrity or a TV show, and what pains they undertake, how much preparation they make, how much investments they make just to be with this person, get an autograph and shake hands. So you can see the whole projection of the omnipotence, the splendor and the dazzle, which is at work. So if the adult life based upon gender, uh, there is a projection. Based upon omnipotence, there is a projection. Based upon the fear of authority figure, there is a projection. And therefore, we see the experiences with the breast replaying and influencing the adult life in normal state. And when we look at pathological adult state, we very distinctly see how the projection of the bad breast, the split being open, leads to so many anxiety disorders. And the ecstasy leads to so many of addictions, not all of them, but many of them. So we see the manifestation of the breast phenomena of early childhood in different ways in adults, both in normal adults and those with pathological difficulties.
You just said that in adults it's mostly a gendered or gendered bias response. But can it be like gender neutral also? Can you explain this a little more?
The unconscious understanding of the breast as a source of nurturance and security is by and large gender neutral. But the unconscious looking at the breast as a source of erotic pleasure is a very gendered phenomenon. And here when we talk of gender, we have to look at the masculinity and femininity more than the biological gender. So in heterosexual males, it's a very clear understanding of the object of pleasure. In women, we have the split or rather said division. those with high masculinity and on the bisexual homosexual side, they would still see the breast as an object of pleasure, which the heterosexual women are less likely to do from an erotic point of view. And uh, with regard to the omnipotence aspect of it, the splendor and the dazzle, that again is gender neutral. Both men and women, regardless of their sexual orientation, masculinity and femininity, both of them are in the grip of those dynamics of omnipotence. Both of them have the addiction of ecstasy, and both of them have the dazzle of the splendor, and both of them have the terror of the bed breast and the terror of authority figures. So it's a mix of everything. Certain parts are gendered, certain parts are not gendered.
How does the breast relate to psychopathology?
Uh, we can see that in a variety of pathological situations. For example, Klein used to say internalization of a good, reliable, stable object, meaning the good breast, is central to biological and psychological health. So if that has not happened, so almost what you can call a psychological immunity goes low, and one gets vulnerable on the psychological aspect of health. Second, if the split is open, we see a variety of anxiety spectrum difficulties because of the terror of the bed breast. If the split is open, we also see the ecstasy, the addiction of ecstasy. And that creates a difficulty because you are constantly in search of an ecstasy. People or situations cannot provide you, and you keep moving from one to the other, people or situation, at a great social cost. We have the whole aspect of the fear of attack, the whole spectrum of paranoid ideation, regardless of what is the intensity, which has to do with the attack of the bed breast, which gets us into this whole spectrum of catastrophic thinking and paranoid ideation, which can take variety of forms from anxiety disorders to delusional disorders. Then we have this whole aspect of object loss, the early life loss of the breast, and based upon at what stage in life the loss was felt, how deeply the loss was felt, before the loss was felt, how many good experiences were there, and after the loss was felt, what were the real life experiences, were they adding or subtracting from the trauma. Based on this, a variety of pathological manifestations happen, which can range from psychosis to personality disorders to more neurotic disorders, ordinary neurotic disorders. So then we have this whole spectrum of addiction, a constant search for the ecstasy of the all good breast, or trying to forget the fear of retribution, or overcoming the loss, overcoming the pain of loss, or because the good, reliable, stable object could not be internalized, there is a fear of the disintegration anxiety, and one needs anything to provide concentration, convergence, and solidity to overcome the disintegration anxiety. And often, that too much of unregulated life energy needs a dose of something which puts in some sort of inertia, some form of death instinct to provide stability to that psychological system. And there, the addiction becomes an escape from disintegration anxiety or internalized deadness. And then we have the uh, whole relationship spectrum, where because of the relationship patterns of early life, the later relationships patterns, they get skewed. And all this leads to variety of pathological manifestations. They may appear in different chapters of DSM. But if we trace back the roots psychoanalytically, many pathologies from different chapters of DSM converge into some phenomena of the breast of early life. And therefore, the early life bliss at the breast is such an important thing for all of us.
How do you place the genesis of personality disorders in the sequence of early life loss of breast?
It's very important to note when the loss of the breast has taken place, how severe it is, and after the loss, what are the real life experiences? Do they add or subtract from the trauma? And before the loss happened, how much was the period of good experiences? And how deep were those good experiences? It's very important because let us say the loss happens after 2 years or 1 year. It's not such a severe loss. But let us say we are talking of a loss that happens at 3 months and 6 months. Now, those are very early periods. Now, if the person has had some good experiences before the loss happens, the pathology is less severe. If there were little good experiences and the loss happens, it's very severe. If after the loss happens, person has good experiences, it can to some extent moderate the early life loss. In case of personality disorders, the most common thing that we see is that the person had some good experiences in early life, maybe 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and then the loss happens. And after the loss happens, usually the real life experiences were on the negative side. They were not adding to health, they were actually subtracting from health and adding to the trauma. And this is a classical picture of the personality disorders if you look at it from object loss standpoint. Then you have 3 or 4 months of good experience with the good breast, then the loss, and then over a long period of time, experiences that make more acute this trauma. And that's a very classical picture of personality disorders. In psychosis, we see that the early life experience of good objects itself was not adequate. And then the loss happens. And therefore, because the early life good experiences were not enough, we see the movement more towards psychosis rather than towards personality disorders. So it's not a rule, it's not a theory, but based on experience, this is what we see most of the time.
And in psychoanalysis, how do issues related to the breast get healed?
In many different ways. The first is the person becomes aware of these dynamics. So the intellectual understanding comes first. Then the person starts observing them in real life and trying to do whatever he can do intellectually. The third, he looks at these things being present in so many different ways in life, even in so-called normal situations. Slowly, then fourth effect starts coming up. If the therapist and the whole therapy situation is seen as a good, reliable, stable object, and the internalization starts. What Kohut calls the transmuting internalization, and what Klein says internalization of a good, reliable, stable object. So what could not happen in early life now happens in therapy. And that creates the capability to actually enhance the good stock of experiences and move towards closing of the slit, which till now could not be done. Sixth is the catharsis of emotions. That also creates ego strength, and because of the split being open, the negative experiences which have been accumulated, slowly and gradually, they can be catharted out. Experiences of self-object type, experiences of support, validation, experiences of a good parent, directly or indirectly, all those experiences happen, and all of that helps the person to uh, move forward in healing the early life difficulty with the breast. And when one goes deeper inside, one gets in connection with the affect which was experienced in very early life. Now, two things happen. Some people get in touch with that affect and can directly deal with it slowly and gradually as an observer, where you are not completely overwhelmed. You can see that affect, but an observer is different. And that observer can observe and think and try to change what is there inside, and the change happens. Some people do it differently. They don't directly get a feel or a touch of the affect, but they get visuals. And below the visuals, the affective healing is going on, but is not experientially felt. So what they see is they come to what I call, I use a term for it, dark affective bricks. The early life templates which were created at the end of the traumatic affect, at the end of the traumatic event, which have become such powerful templates which refuse to engage with reason of the adult. And despite the rational part of us knowing all that is to be known, these templates continue on their own, completely untouched and unwilling to yield to our reason. And this I call as, those templates I call as dark astral bricks or dark affective bricks, whatever word you use. And this one encounters in one's uh, inner journey in the form of a visual. And many people have these visuals where they can visualize these dark affective bricks or astral bricks and talk to them, and either by visual action or by understanding or just by observation, we are able to slowly proceed at the visual level in terms of feeling, and somehow in a way that is not experienced to us, the affective change also happens in the unconscious. So there may be an affective healing which may not take the form of usual catharsis. We may just see the visual representation of it, the visual counterpart process of it. It may come in one's inner observation or in one's dream or fantasies or in art, but one may not directly feel the effect which actually is being changed and is at work, is getting processed at a deeper level. So all these processes go on. Catharsis also is a very important element. Articulation of desire and ability to face one's difficult things is another element. In the safe space where you don't have to fear criticism or shame or lack of confidentiality, the articulation of desire and exhausting the articulation of oneself. That also, and a very deep self-acceptance, very profound self-acceptance. That also helps to a great deal, and all this put together help us to heal very early life experiences of difficult experiences with the breast, along with therapy. In real life, if we really meet people who can fulfill to us in some degree our expectations and experiences we desire with the good breast, and be those good self objects to us, the all providing self objects, then that often heals much faster than only therapy. In fact, many people have healed themselves without therapy just by virtue of good experiences in real life. Almost as though where the developmental process was arrested, it restarted and completed itself in a healthy way. So these are the ways in which in therapy we heal these difficulties.
Wow, this was a beautiful explanation, Mr. Vaidya, about, how therapy can heal a very deep rooted issue. I think long-term therapy and a good therapist will really make it effective.
True.
And of course, outside support system.
So long-term therapy, a good therapist, and one good object in the real world.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I think this seems to be the recipe of the profound healing.
Yeah. Okay, we come to our last question. How does spirituality engage with this phenomenon, or how does this phenomenon get healed in spirituality?
Spirituality first puts up bliss at the breast as one of its goals. So once you put this as a goal, its significance enhances many times over. So in psychoanalysis, this concept may be a footnote. Not many will bother about it. But in spirituality, it is at the center. It is the goal state we have to reach. The ability to be in bliss on demand. So the goal state is the state of no thought, awareness, bliss, and presence. This is the goal state. And once people realize this is the goal state, people put respect and significance and work very seriously and sincerely towards this state. So the first is the very significance of this state. And this concept is raised sky high in spirituality because central goal. Second, the practices in spirituality provide for good objects to be internalized. And that helps you at times to experience bliss at the breast and to heal yourself biologically and psychologically in some ways. Third, spirituality provides you with tools. It may be idol therapy, it may be meditation, visualization, herbal preparations, certain rituals, the connection with the guru, connection with your fellow disciples, mythology, spiritual texts, spiritual music, and a variety of techniques, basket full of tools to get into this state of bliss at the breast as far or as often as possible. And meditation is a very good tool because meditation by and large is used to get a taste of bliss at the breast. And of course, we are referring to spiritual bliss. We are not referring to infantile bliss. The two are different. Although there is a broad category I used to put all of them inside, but the oceanic experience of the infant and the spiritual oneness experience of the master are two different things. One is a pre-ego state, second is a post-ego state. One is completely by default and outside of one's control and almost like a natural organic process unfolding. Second is the achievement which comes after years of practice. So you can't compare the infantile oceanic oneness with spiritual oneness of a master. The two are two ends of a spectrum. One starts with one and ends with the other. So they are two ends of the spectrum. You can't put them as one. The last part is spirituality provides you with the inner science to understand how something takes you away from these states that I have put under the category of bliss at the breast into other pursuits, and how you can disentangle yourself from there and get in touch with bliss at the breast as often as possible, as deeply as possible, and with ultimate goal of making it an unconditional default state, regardless of what other situations inside and outside you are in. So Spirituality provides you with theory of it, with tools of it, with a taste of it, with objects around you, and in mythology. And the whole ecosystem helps you to manage this state of bliss at the breast in an optimum way to reach your goal.
Thank you, Mr. Vaidya, for this very enriching discussion. It was truly a pleasure to talk about this subject, which is again not so talked about or discussed or brought up in common language as well as in therapeutic situations. Thank you so much. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.